figured after the last one you would have driven away all your customers.
No, not at all. Actually, it resonated pretty good. You would think that the political podcast wouldn't really do as well, but
you know what?
I'm telling you.
It's electricity. If you wanted to replace all of hydrocarbons, you're probably looking at building maybe 684 nuclear reactors at a cost of about 3 or 4 trillion. Let's be realistic here, right? About what Canada needs to be thinking about, right?
It's like that number just seems just like that's a sticker shock that I don't think I've seen before.
Exactly, and so
this clip is this hit home to me.
Yep.
And I was like, what's going on here?
Should give a warning to your listeners. This is very using unparliamentary language.
It is very true.
Unparliamentary language.
Yeah, okay, warning.
As young as 11 years of age. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that the House brace themselves for the following words from one such book called Eleanor Park, and I quote, "I know you're a slut, you smell like cum, nothing but a bitch and heat."
Remember,
end quote.
That is crazy. 11-year-olds?
11-year-old. And you should, like you say, you should see the illustrations in some of these books. Government is not telling you about this. They're not talking about this. They're saying, oh, it'll be okay. We have to have an honest conversation with people in British Columbia.
Down the road, we did like a live recording.
Sure.
But we post it in advance so people can submit questions.
Yep.
And then they can chime in, like they can watch and maybe...
Thanks for having me on. I look forward to our next
pleasure.
chance. That voice of God thing, what that is when you are doing like a dinner for 1,000 people and everybody's talking and you need to get everybody's attention. You just, close your mouth over it and, this is...
catches everyone's
attention out there in deep voice, right? Everybody's goes like, what?
Who is that?
So get people's attention, allow you to settle things down.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
I'll try. I'll snap my fingers.
Yeah, some people clap and there's all kinds of things.
But I like the voice of God. Who is back? All right. Well, we've got John Rustad. You're a repeat guest. This is amazing.
It's great.
From episode 80 in July 2023. So I'm going to give a bit of a condensed...
A lot has changed since then.
Yeah, I know. It hasn't been that long.
Crazy. I know it was like, 6 months ago, but lots has changed.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, I hope to kind of touch on maybe some of that. There's been... Well, I think the stuff that kind of explains a little bit about you and the history and everything up to that point, I'm going to leave for people who are curious to listen to that episode. And I'll just give a condensed overview of who you are. And then we'll go from there. So John Rustad, born 1963, is a Canadian politician and current leader of the BC Conservative Party. Left the BC United Party and then back then was called the Liberal Party in 2022 due to disagreement with the leader, Kevin Falcon, and some statements over climate change.
Couple just quick little corrections,
sure,
if you don't mind. It's the Conservative Party of British Columbia.
What did I say?
BC Conservative Party. And everybody does it. Everybody does it that
Conservative way. BC? Just
Conservative Party of BC.
Oh, okay. I'll make that correct.
And I didn't leave the BC Liberal Party. They kicked me out.
They kicked you out over disagreement, I guess, with a
they didn't tweet that you made. Didn't want me talking about climate.
Yeah.
Now, of course, they've flip-flopped on their position.
That's true there.
So I was kind of like, okay, now why did you kick me out again?
There's some... I asked that about them because they say they're conservative, but then anybody that has conservative viewpoints are...
They say they're united, but clearly they're not united. Their first first action was actually, to kick people out, which is not right.
No.
But I also have to chuckle because, many people have canceled their memberships in the United Party and have come over and joined us. So clearly they're not very united.
Not really, but you just kind of let it land where they need to, and it just kind of takes care of itself, eh? Like as far as...
Well, they're a typical, what used to be a federal liberal type party, which is they just, put their finger up in the wind and say, what do we need to be doing? Where should we be on the political spectrum to try to get votes, as opposed to actually standing for principles and asking people to support those principles.
Guided by the polls?
They're just doing everything based on polls and focus groups and everything else, as opposed to, we're just doing what we believe is right.
Yeah.
And it's been resonating in the polls. So that's good.
No, that's obvious. I mean, we always got to touch on that because it's resonating for sure. I mean, well, here it says within 6 months, BC, Conservative Party of BC gained official party status as the fourth recognized political party in BC, following BC United, NDP, and Green Party. Party has attracted over 30 MLAs so far, with a diverse candidates
yeah.
with diverse backgrounds. That include the former RCMP officers, veterans, doctors, lawyers.
We've got one lawyer right now running for us. It's actually what we're short on, which is interesting because, lawyers tend to be sometimes frowned upon, but we do need some good lawyers. And however, I think we're going to be having another one nominated here shortly, a very strong lady. So I'm hopeful that that process will go through. And yeah.
Well, I want to do a couple of little shout outs and a gift here before we get started. And then can I go over like some stuff I kind of had here, and then we'll just get to what we can.
I'll quit yakking.
And one of the ideas that I'll kind of run by you though is because time always seems to be so short. We got a recording, this recording, and then one previous. So what I was thinking of doing, because there seems to be such a demand for live streams and people want to engage, is if down the road we did like a live recording.
Sure.
But we post it in advance so people can submit questions.
Yep.
And then they can chime in, like they can watch and maybe engage through questions, and we can address questions that have been pre-submitted.
Happy to do that. I think that'd be fun.
I think that would probably help with, trying to capture it all in one recording, right? And then it gets a lot more engagement, because one of them did a little TikTok. I'm telling you, TikTok is powerful sometimes, because I did one about, I did a little clip about your comment on EV in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And that thing took right off in the Netherlands. And I got like 50 or 60,000 hits down there with, a couple 200-300 comments that I was going to play. And then you can read the comments, because I got a clip of, I think, what you were referencing as far as the ban.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people in the Netherlands that were like, no, I drive an EV and it's all good. So I was like, ooh, well, why don't we then kind of get your thoughts on it? And then that way it kind of addresses the misinformation kind of element there.
Sure. Yeah.
But before we get going, I got a gift. Kevin Unscripted gift. In this one, because you're a repeat guest, you get a Bluetooth speaker, you've got T-shirts in there. I mean, you get pretty much full access to the goodie table we have over there. Just as a, gift of appreciation for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me back on. I figured after the last one, you would have driven away all your customers.
Yeah, not at all. Actually, it resonated pretty good. You would think that the political podcast wouldn't really do as well, but and I'm telling you,
that's the difference of who we are as the Conservative Party. It's not about the politics. It's about standing for what's right and just fighting for the average everyday person and trying to be straight up.
Yeah.
And people are going like, what? Well, wait a second. This isn't the usual poly spin that I hear and from politicians. And so, that's who we're trying to be as a political party.
Yeah. Well, why don't we touch on some of these subjects, and then I'm going to let you pick out of the list which one you'd like to start with. How's that sound? Because I've got where I met Roslyn. Shout out to Roslyn. Actually, and Dominic, by the way. I got to do a shout out to them both. Jordan Keeley and Larry Newfield. And they both gave me a bottle of whiskey. And I'm hoping maybe at the very end we can try out the bottle of whiskey. I've got a cup there. We can take a sip. But touch on, what your thoughts are on the Tucker Carlson event. That's most recent here, just the last few days. You're meeting with Daniel Smith, Child Act and empowering parental control, fentanyl distribution to minors without parental consent or awareness in some cases, the Child Infant Act and addressing fentanyl distribution to minors, wraparound services, the TikTok video we're talking about, the challenge of electrical grid capacities. Vote splitting, your notwithstanding clause or open air drug use issue would probably be a good one to touch on. Low barrier housing and its impact. Of course, crime is always a good one. I mean, well, I can go on and on, but actually another one here, SOGI 123. That's a good one. We can start with more, but I mean, out of that list,
to say none of the above.
You don't want to hit on any of them?
Happy to go to wherever you want to go, actually. Whatever you'd like to do. I mean,
the Child Act and the electrical part, I think, are
I was going to say, and I mean, electrical, given that we're up in the Peace Country and Site C is being built, and about to come on stream, let's touch on our grid and our power and what that means for the province.
Yeah.
It touches on EVs, it touches on heat pumps, it touches on a whole bunch of things, climate, et cetera.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's start with that. I'm going to show you the TikTok then, because that'll kind of kick it off, and then we can address that.
In Norway, where they've got a pretty extensive ferry network, at least two of the private ferry providers, and these are large ferries like we use in British Columbia, they have banned electric vehicles from being on those ferries, because if there's ever a fire, there's nothing they can do about it. Mm. Not only the toxins that are put out into the air, they've banned them. They're not allowed to go on those ferries with an electric vehicle because because of the risk of a fire.
So that garnered quite a number of comments here, and I kind of put a post on here that kind of addressed, I think, what you were talking about there, which we can take a look at there, I guess, because I think this is, if I'm wrong, what you were referring to. Norwegian Ferry Company bans electrified vehicles from being transported on its ships. Is this what you're talking about here?
And so I was talking with a individual. He's not fire chief, but he's divisional commander, whatever it's called. I can't remember the name of the position. And what they said is, if they have a fire from an electric vehicle, this is not on a boat, but on mainland, on a bridge or something like that, the only way to put it out is basically bring a truckload of sand over and bury it.
Yeah, there's no way to put them out.
There's no way to put it out. And so if you have a fire on a boat, then how do you, and vehicles are all packed in there, how do you make sure that heat being generated from that is not going to be damaging or spreading to other vehicles?
Yeah.
There's no way to do that. And that's becomes part of the problem in terms of this. Now, PC Ferries apparently has some sort of plan in place with regards to it, but clearly, when you look at what's going on in Norway with those providers, and you look at some of the disasters where shipping cars and ships have had to be abandoned, et cetera, there's a problem here. There's a problem with EVs that really have not been thought about as we expand out, EV and EV driving.
Were they banning electric vehicles, or was it just one isolated point that they did for a short period of time? Because that was what a lot of the people were those were actual people living in Norway that were saying, look, we have EV vehicles, and they had incentives even for a lot of EV vehicles to get on the ferry. They provide charging.
Yeah, and all I know is the articles that I read. I've never traveled to Norway to go firsthand and find out.
Yeah.
But I do know that electric vehicles and potential fires from electric vehicles is a real problem. So, for example, in Florida, when there's a hurricane and electric vehicles, get wet or whatever the case may be, they actually put these things 10 feet apart in a field until they're all dried out and no longer a risk for a fire.
Mm. Wow.
So I don't know to what extent this is a problem, but what I do know is there are lots of things about EVs that we don't know about, in terms of, some of the problems. And it's not so much that, an EV is flawed in its design, because it's not, but where you have damage, where, batteries may have been damaged, they may have been overcharged, there may be, an accident or something like that. That's where these things can be compromised. And so when you think about an electric vehicle, when you think about the batteries, there's a tremendous amount of energy that's stored in there. Even things like electric bikes. And I remember seeing a video, I think it was from Europe, where an electric bike was on a train, and caught fire, and they had to stop and abandon the train basically because there's no way to put out the fire for the electric bike. And so it's when these batteries get damaged, they get at risk of having these fires. And it's also why, quite frankly, if you have a lithium battery, you can't put it into the luggage compartment. It has to be on the plane. Because if it's in the luggage compartment and catches fire, now you got a real problem for your plane.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you can't put it out. You're going to have it like a trap door or something. The parachute drop is somewhere.
out the plane, right? Yeah. But I mean, it's so this is, electric or, batteries that are containing that much energy. People need to understand that if it's a release of that energy, that is something that is a real problem.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, in addition to, obviously what we already touched on as far as the demand on the current grid that we have now, where it's going to start causing, brownout and blackouts. And I'm not 100% sure what the difference from one to the other is, but at the end of the day, we experienced a little bit about that just with the current capacity in Alberta with what Daniel Smith had to deal with because of cold weather that typically in historical patterns, if you look back, is very normal. This is so what happens.
It's interesting what Daniel said about her power grid, and that is during that cold snap, they were only getting 7% of the capacity of their windmills in terms of the commitment to the grid, and 0 from their solar panels.
Oh, really?
And so that's now
you
look about when you build out your grid, if you're building significant amounts of wind and solar, and you're not getting that capacity, where's your power going to come from?
Well,
that becomes a real problem because they are not reliable.
If it's not built out, the power is coming from where? What's the answer to that question?
Well, exactly. And so you look at British Columbia, we consume, this is from 2021 numbers, we consume 1,343 petajoules of energy. So petajoules is a very large number. Only 16% of that is electricity. 84% is hydrocarbons. And so when you start talking about, for example, let's make sure that everybody has heat pumps.
Yeah.
Right? You can't use natural gas for heating your home anymore. You've got to use heat pumps. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, about 5 to 7% of the energy consumed by a home is hydrocarbons. So you're talking about 10% of roughly of the energy we consume as a province is residential. About 11, 12% is commercial. So if you're going to replace all of the natural gas for commercial and residential, you're talking about needing to build the equivalent to about 4 or 5 Site C dams.
Wow.
To do that, just to replace the natural gas in cars, or in homes and commercial. You're talking about transportation. Transportation consumes about 30% of the energy that we consume. So if you wanted all of our transportation to be electric, so that's all of our boats and trains and planes and cars and everything we use to get around. You're talking about needing to build 20 plus Site C dams. That's what the energy requirement would be. And so people aren't, the government is not telling you about this or not talking about this. They're saying, it'll be okay. And here we got a government that's actually done away with the requirement of BC to be energy self-sufficient when it comes to electricity because they know they aren't going to have the capacity. So they were reliant. Last year, for example, we bought more electricity than we sold. We're reliant on electricity from other jurisdictions. We are putting British Columbians at risk to the vagrants of whatever policies or approaches other jurisdictions may have. And that's wrong. So that's why when we look at energy mix for BC, what should it be? We shouldn't be just going headlong to say we want to get rid of natural gas or we want to get rid of, other hydrocarbons like gasoline or diesel. We actually need to be having a plan in place in terms of where will that power come from? What does that look like? And how many decades will it take to produce? And is that really where we want to go? We're not going to likely be building any more dams in BC. I think the likelihood of that is pretty slim.
It is very slim, I would imagine.
So what are we going to do? Are we going to start producing coal-fired power? Are we going to do natural gas-fired power? This is the reason why I raised the issue. Maybe we should even consider nuclear power.
Yeah,
we have to have an honest conversation with people in British Columbia about our power, where it comes from, how much we want to rely on electricity, and what the cost is. What is the cost of the various options? What will it mean to you as a ratepayer? If you're struggling to put food on the table, if you're struggling just to pay your rent, the last thing you want to have to do is think, oh my God, my electricity price is going to triple. What is that going to look like? We need to be able to have that conversation. And that's one of the reasons for saying, let's put nuclear in the mix. Let's have a conversation. What do we need to do if we want to use more electricity? And in the meantime, let's stop this madness until we actually have a plan. Let's keep using the energy that we have and that we need.
Well, the transition over to alternative forms of energy is one thing, and I've heard and I've seen a lot of people ask those questions. Opposition government, whether it's a provincial or even a federal government, asking those questions, and the response is nothing other than just it has to happen at any cost. What is the rationale behind that though? Like, what is the mindset?
It's an ideology. It's elitism. It's this whole idea that somehow changing, somehow taxing people from things like a carbon tax is going to change the weather. Like taxing people in poverty is going to change the weather. I mean, it's nonsense, right? It's virtue signaling. It's not based in reality in terms of what needs to happen. If you think about Canada. So Canada is similar to British Columbia. About 16% of our energy that we use is electricity. If you wanted to replace all of hydrocarbons, you're probably looking at building maybe 684 nuclear reactors at a cost of about $3 or $4 trillion. Let's be realistic here, right? About what Canada needs to be thinking about, right?
Like that number just seems just like that's a sticker shock that I don't think I've seen before.
Exactly. And so you look at it and think, okay, somebody. And I may have my math off by a little bit, right? I mean, but
yeah, I'm sure you're in the ballpark. I mean, when you're talking about numbers that big, 1 or 2 trillion, I'm sure it doesn't really matter.
Trillion or two amongst friends. I mean, come on. Now we're talking about real money here sooner or later. But no, I mean, this is what we're talking about if we're doing this. And people have this belief that, we're going to put up a solar panel and a little windmill and somehow, we're going to run our lives. Well, it can contribute, but it is not what we need in terms of, our quality of life. Now, if you're like the Green Party and you want everybody just to be naked running under the trees, okay, maybe you don't need the power. But I don't think that's quite the quality of life that most people are looking for.
Well, I mean, that's a good analogy to make, naked underneath the trees. What exactly are you looking for? Like, we're talking about fuel consumption and heating and everything else. EVs is just one form, but fossil fuels is part of the DNA of our quality of life and standard of living as we know it right now. Like you can't just shut that down and expect anything to be possible. You just had a drink of water. They want to ban plastics. You want to talk about healthcare. A huge portion, if not, well, just about all of our medical technology right now is based off of hydrocarbons. So we're focusing on one element, but you pretty much got to take absolutely everything that we know as it is today out of the equation.
About 6,000 products that we consume on a daily basis in our society is a derivative of hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
And what we do. And look at what hydrocarbons has done for our society. So, for example, at the turn of the 19th century, 1900, or turn 20th, I guess, century it was, around 1900, 1920. When you compare that to today, we have seen about a 95 to 97% reduction in the number of people who have died because of environmental issues. Primarily because of cold, right? People aren't dying because it's cold. Why has there been such a big shift? Why has there been such a big drop? And it's because of energy. Because we've had cheap, reliable energy. Yeah. People get in the car and run away from a hurricane. People can heat their homes. They're not gonna freeze in the middle of the night, right? People can get around in reliable vehicles. They aren't going to break down on the side of the road and have problems. So a big chunk of our quality of life has come from using hydrocarbons. And whether that is, for example, fertilizer, nitrogen-based fertilizer, which uses natural gas to produce components that go into that. Some people say, oh my God, we shouldn't be using it. We shouldn't be using nitrogen-based fertilizer. Well, let's take a look at that. Nitrogen-based fertilizer using that nitrogen-based fertilizer, I should say, produces about 40% of what the world consumes in terms of food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So if you take nitrogen-based fertilizer out, even when you bring in organic or other things, and some people are saying there's, new types of things that can come in, that's fine if that works. But what you're talking about is if you just suddenly say no, you're talking about a dramatic reduction in the amount of food and hundreds of millions, if not billions of people starving.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, I'm not up for that. That's just craziness.
100%. You're talking about, we're getting into like that whole fertilizer and the farmers and that.
Exactly. And so this is, our hydrocarbons have become a significant part of our society. So let's make a plan to move away from them. I'm okay with that. But let's be realistic. It's going to take decades and decades before we even can come close to it. And let's be realistic about what it means in terms of quality of life. Right now, our energy is relatively affordable. Take the carbon tax off of, natural gas and you drop the price by half of the product or more. Because carbon tax seems to be more than the actual gas itself. But you look at it and you think, our whole quality of life is driven around our ability to have cheap, affordable energy. And you do a graph of all the countries in the world. And what you'll see is that countries that have a very high quality of life, very high living standards, very high environmental standards, all have significant amounts of cheap, affordable energy. And countries that are very poor environmental standards, very poor quality of life, have virtually no energy. There's a direct correlation between our ability to have the kind of life that we want for children and grandchildren, and energy consumption. So,
and
if we want to take energy away, what does that mean? We're not going to carry on with the quality of life we have.
Well, no, and there's no ability to have any kind of real change I've said this in the past, when you're in the poorhouse, what kind of leverage or power or ability of control do you have? And if you think poverty looks clean and friendly, then I think you're very disillusioned. Poverty is starting to manifest itself in our streets. We're having an uprising with tent cities and homeless right now, and none of that looks pretty. It's not clean and it's not responsible.
No, and like I say, half the people today are struggling to put food on the table, and you want to make their energy more expensive?
Yeah.
How does that work? Like, what is it we're trying to achieve? And so what you see is governments like, David Eby's NDP, and even what you're seeing federally. You're seeing governments that are out there virtue signaling because they're trying to scare you, and they're saying like, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. We're not in an existential threat. We are not in a crisis. Climate change is real. It's something that we need to deal with. We need to be able to adapt. We need to make sure that we look after our people. It's not, suddenly that we've got to tell everybody, you've got to stop eating beef. You got to eat insects. And by the way, you can't have energy. Like, come on.
So what you're kind of saying, though, is that climate change, and this is where you can correct me, and I know you have no problem doing that because you have already a few times, which is good. I encourage that. So what I kind of heard you say, though, is climate change is kind of more or less a cyclical pattern. The impact that humans are having on it right now isn't at a point where we need to go into the poorhouse and going to have a direct result in reducing climate change. It's more responsible to be able to work with it and be more responsible in sourcing alternative forms of energy as the technology starts to improve.
We got to look at what is our priority. So the people that are very worried about climate change, what are they saying? They're saying that the world's going to come to an end if we're 1.5 degrees, warmer.
Yeah.
You had Greta Thunberg, who came out and said, in 5 years, if we don't change, we're all going to be dead, right? I was like, okay, come on. Enough of the hype. Enough of that nonsense. Let's be realistic. Most people don't even realize we're still in an ice age. Planet Earth is still in an ice age.
Yeah.
Like, we've, only small periods of time in Earth's history have been ice ages. Most of the time, it's been quite a bit warmer than now. We are still in an ice age. And we probably will be for another 1 million or 2 million years. It's going to be long past our lifetimes. So the question is, do we really think that what we can do on the planet is going to change these patterns that have been in place, for since the beginning of time and the beginning of Earth's history? We are having an impact, and we need to be conscious of that. But it is not, a disaster. So you should ask a climatologist one time, an expert that's, out there saying that, the world's coming to an end because we're, using natural gas to heat our homes. Ask them, at what temperature should the Earth be?
That's a good question.
Because I can tell you, they won't tell you.
No, they won't. No.
Should it have been 150 years ago when we were at the bottom of a mini ice age?
Yeah.
Should it have been 14,000 years ago when there was 2 kilometers of ice over most of British Columbia? Should it have been, should it be 50 million years ago when it was like 3 degrees or 4 degrees warmer than it is today? And with tons of vegetation and millions more species? Like, so where should it be? And they can't answer that question.
They can't, but they also are going against the exact, you want to talk about climate change and science and whatnot. And the narrative that is being talked about right now in the legislature is a whole lot different than what's being taught in the museum across the street from the I went and I took a look at that museum from the legislature. I had like a couple hours to check out. And I was like, wait a minute. I just went to question period where they were making an argument about climate change. And then I'm in the museum across from the building where they were having that discussion. And it was talking about a whole completely different story.
Yeah.
Where's
the reality?
I found that ironic.
And like I say, so you look at it and they call CO2 pollution. Wait a second here. We are carbon-based entities. We're carbon-based life forms.
Yeah.
Carbon is a necessary component of all life on this planet. There is no life on this planet without carbon. And these guys are calling it a pollution. Like, that's how ludicrous this is.
Yeah.
It just is. Now, like anything, I suppose if you're like 20 or 30,000 parts per million, then we'd have a problem. But Earth's never been up there, and we never would get up there in terms of our Earth, in terms of how it works. But at 400 parts per million, we're barely above what it would be for all plant life on this planet to die. All plant life, if you get below 125 or 135, 150 parts per million, all plant life on this planet would likely die, which means we die. And we got very close to that. We got down to 185.
Well, if we would have had this discussion when the woolly mammoth was still alive, I think we would have been blamed for their annihilation. They wouldn't be around because of humans, right? I mean,
it's interesting you mentioned that. And when Site C was being built, of course, they did significant significant archaeological assessments. And they actually found an ancient tool that was used by the local indigenous people. And they did some DNA sampling on it. And what they found on it was elephant DNA. In other words, that tool was around when woolly mammoths were around still in northern BC.
Ooh.
Pretty remarkable, isn't it? Pretty remarkable.
Kind of earth-shattering.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was...
Wow.
That was... Anyway, we're off track here a little bit in terms of it, but these sort of things are very interesting in terms of our history.
So this is going to be a nice short episode, and I'm going to have to start wrapping it up. But I do have a little bit of wiggle room here, and I'd like to use that wiggle room for something that is important to me, especially because it goes back to drug addiction and misuse and your notwithstanding clause. And before I get your input on this, I kind of want to make a bit of a comment on this because this is something that isn't personal to just me. I think this is every single person that seems to be alive in North America specifically anyways, because I thought I have a lot of very close family members that have dealt with this. And I thought our stories and experiences were fairly unique and ultra extreme. But the more people now are starting to talk and express and verbalize their concerns and everything, the more I think the general public is becoming aware that this is an increasing problem. One of the things that I feel is a little bit of a double hit is that the problem is at where the parents' control is starting to be eroded. And I personally experienced that in a real way. They threatened to take one child out if I had another child in my own house. And, the result of all of that is very damaging, and there hasn't been a full recovery, and a lot of people are experiencing that. Now you have the government not only mismanaging the ability to allow their parents to have control of healthy parenting control. I need to elaborate the healthy part because there are exceptions to all of that. But now something that seems wildly alarming when it comes to giving fentanyls to minors without even the parental consent or awareness. Okay, can you can you speak to what is that all about, and how do you plan on addressing it? Because that's probably one of the craziest things I've ever heard of.
Some things you look at in policies and approach and you say they're just wrong. I would actually look at something like that and say that's just evil.
Yeah.
I mean, look, fentanyl kills people. We have a crisis in British Columbia. We have a drug overdose crisis, primarily with fentanyl. Not all fentanyl. There's some other drugs that are part of that as well. But fentanyl kills people. And somehow government wants to give fentanyl to kids who are facing addictions. And they're doing it because they want to give them safe fentanyl. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as safe drugs. I mean, come on. There just isn't. It's a fallacy, right? I mean, it's just decriminalization and safe supply are failed experiments. I've talked to some analysts that say British Columbia has the highest per capita level of addictions in North America. How could that be if our policies are working? Obviously, our policies are not working. One of the candidates that's running for us in North Island, a doctor specializing in addiction management, addiction treatment. She had a patient, high school student, who is addicted to one of these safe supply drugs. And she asked him, and this is a small, high school in northern Vancouver Island. She asked the patient, said, how many other people do you know who are addicted? And the patient said, at least 30. This is what's going on in our schools. And government, through our safe supply program, are saying, oh, these people are addicted. Let's give them more. Let's give them a dangerous product so that they aren't going out on the streets and getting even more dangerous products. What happened to the idea that, maybe we should be trying to get these people off drugs? Maybe we should be trying to find a way to have them start entering a path of recovery? And maybe we should be expanding that as opposed to saying, here's some drugs, be safe.
Well, and you're removing the people that care about these children the most, their ability to actually be parents. And whatever happened to just the fact that we're addressing children with addictions, but what's really going on? You're treating a symptom. There is something much more serious and sinister going on when you have to start dealing with children getting hooked on drugs now. Yeah. Like, what is really happening? That's, I think, what we should be addressing more importantly than trying to give them free stuff.
But you mentioned, people up here, homeless up here, and the drug situation. I know that the addiction problem up here is huge, just like it is in just about every corner of the province. You go downtown Vancouver, walk around. It used to just be, pockets a little bit on the Vancouver east side. Now it's everywhere. It's just everywhere. There's people, sleeping, doing drugs. I was walking past a Starbucks back about 2 months ago in downtown Vancouver, and two addicts were there about to shoot up drugs. And as I walked by, they realized that they were kind of in my way, and they said, "Oh, sorry." And I'm like, this has become normal. This is what we think is okay. The legislature passed a piece of legislation which was supported by the NDP and the BC United Party, by all their members, that said you can't do drugs in parks and you can't do drugs in playgrounds and all these sort of things. But essentially what they're saying is it was okay to walk down the street smoking a crack pipe.
Yeah.
You can't walk down the street drinking a beer. But somehow it's okay to walk down the street and shoot up or smoke a crack pipe. This is the irony. What we think is normal now.
Yeah.
No, this shouldn't be normal. We need to get a serious attention to actually helping people get into recovery. And it has to be a range of things. It's like anything. It can't be just, we're going to house them, or we're going to force them here or do this or that. People are individuals. They've got a wide range of issues that have led to their addiction. You need to have everything from doctor-prescribed treatments to voluntary treatment, to mandatory retreatment, to longer term, in both of those cases, to perhaps, lifelong treatment, where you have people that are maybe damaged beyond repair that cannot recover. Let's see if we can give them some sort of quality of life rather than just living on the street.
Do you plan on addressing some of that with this notwithstanding clause for open air drug use? Like, is that what you're...
Yeah, so there was a court case. So that piece of legislation that came in, and, the United Party and the NDP were thumping their chest saying, "Oh, isn't this great? You won't be able to do drugs in a playground. You can do them just, a few feet outside of a playground." It's like, anyway, they're proud about this. And So believe it or not, there's a group that said, no, this is wrong. There shouldn't be any restrictions on people using drugs in public. And so they fought it in court, and the judge agreed with them and struck down the legislation and suspended it pending, any appeal or anything else that's going on. And I looked at that and I went, no. If we were government in British Columbia, we would look at this from perspective of that there should not be allowed these hard drug use in public, period. It shouldn't be allowed in public space. You're not allowed to drink a beer because you might become intoxicated and create a problem.
Yeah.
Why are you allowed to do hard drugs when you could become, under the influence and be a problem? Like, we should have the same standard. So we would actually say, no, you're not allowed to do hard drugs in public. And if the court were to say, you can't do that, I would say, yes, we can. And I would use the notwithstanding clause. It's time we actually started treating people fairly and actually tried to make our streets and our playgrounds and, our places of business and stuff safe. Like, why is that such a foreign concept?
No,
As a society,
it should be safe. Yeah. That's the argument that I keep hearing that's for it is because, it's the moral position that they're trying to help, the weak. But in doing that, what's happening, look at the reality of this huge, massive increase in addictions and
look at the number
problems
of people that are dying from addictions.
Yeah.
And it's only going up. So doing, the definition of insanity by Albert Einstein is doing more of the same and expecting a different result is insanity.
Yeah.
And so we've had failed policies, and now we want to do more of it because somehow it'll be different. This time it'll be different. It's like socialism. It's like NDP, right? The NDP are socialists. David Eby is a socialist. That is, every type of race that's been done has failed, but nope. He's going to force it, and if it doesn't work, if it doesn't work through his policies, he will force it to work by going to an authoritarian, which is his approach. It's failed everywhere it's been tried. Somehow these people just can't understand that it doesn't work. We have to do a different path.
We do. One more. I'm going to just show a quick video here because it kind of speaks to what you're talking about of you in the legislature. You mind if
I hate watching myself, but go ahead.
Okay. It's about a minute or so.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you're okay with this.
Thousands of British Columbians, many of them from minority communities, have been protesting against SOGI 123, which was originally introduced by the BC United Liberals. Parents are concerned about the sexualization of their children in this NDP government's education system. Will the minister admit that SOGI 123 has been divisive, an assault on parents' rights, and a distraction on student education?
Premier. Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I welcome the member to the House as the leader of his new party. But I got to say, this is not an auspicious start.
Big word.
When you talk about the issues of the day for British Columbians, cost of living, housing, we heard from the BCUP, healthcare, addiction, mental health, to come into this place, use the authority of his office, his new party, to find a small group of kids in our province, to leverage all of that to make them feel less safe at school, less safe in our community, to feed the fires of division in our province and bring culture war to British Columbia, it is not welcome. And when he sat on this side of the House, he supported those same policies, Honourable Chair. It is outrageous that he would stand here and do this. He sees political advantage in picking on kids and families and teachers and schools who are just trying to do their best for kids who are at risk of suicide, Honourable Chair. Shame on him. Choose another question.
You want to hear your response to it? It's fine, David. There's an interesting little side note on that. So out of that, and he's actually very embarrassed about this issue. This is why he came out so viciously attacking it, because this isn't about isolating kids that are vulnerable. This is about taking away parents' rights. This is about a 6-year-old child coming home and at the dinner saying, "Grandpa, is it okay that I'm a boy?" Like, what are we doing here in our schools? This is crazy. The interesting thing about that is, so he came out, in full defense of SOGI and in full defense of parents not having the right to know what's going on with their kids and this whole sexual orientation and gender identity stuff that's in our schools. The BC United Party led a standing ovation for him. They all stood up, and with the NDP applauding the Premier, defending parents not having rights, parents not knowing about their kids, children being confused and unsafe in schools. You got a 9-year-old girl who runs home to go to the bathroom because she doesn't feel safe in the washroom in schools anymore.
Yeah.
Like, this is just wrong. This is just wrong what's going on. Let kids be kids. And yes, there needs to be sexual education. We need to make sure that there's support in place. There needs to be very strong anti-bullying and anti-racism programs in our schools. But let's let our schools get refocused back on academics. Our grades are degrading. Our kids are coming out of school and they're not prepared for university. They're not prepared for their lives going forward. Our schools desperately need to be refocused. And this SOGI has become a very divisive issue, especially with minorities and faith-based parents.
No, it needs to be addressed proper. I'm going to show one more photo here because this is about up here, specifically in Fort Nelson. This was the date here was from March 9th, 2023. So this is not quite a year ago. This was found in the school system, and this is from the Vancouver deal. They're talking about felching, glory holes, snowballing, which I'm not even sure what that is, but it doesn't sound good. Half and half. I think this was grade 8 and 9. Yeah. We don't need, this is not education. This is the furthest thing that we need to be having.
And I got to tell you, that is minor compared to some of the information that I've seen in schools.
I was going to play...
when you look at some of the material,
yeah,
you could not put that on mainstream media because it is pornography.
Yeah, it is.
You would not be allowed. And this is available to kids as young as 11 or even younger.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing in our schools? It doesn't make sense.
Can I play...
Sure.
Who's the MLA that test?
Spanley.
Oh, okay. That's the clip I want to play real quick, and then we're going to wrap it up for real because I do want to make sure you get out of here on time, relatively. Yeah. Oh, let me grab it here real quick.
No problem. This was actually, we talked about this, Bruce and I, before he came into the legislature, and he was really uncomfortable with it. And I said, no, people need to understand just what we are talking about, just what is going on in our schools. Well, so I was really pleased that he was brave enough to do this.
Well, yeah, and the fact that he was attacked so viciously, I'm just going to bring this over to here because the link was sent to me. I don't want that information out.
You know, I think really when I look at this stuff that's going on with our schools, I think if parents really knew what was going on, they would be very upset.
This clip this hits home. This hit home to me.
Yep.
And I was like, what's going on here?
Should give a warning to your listeners. This is very using unparliamentary language.
It is very true.
Unparliamentary language.
Yeah, okay. Warning. Fair warning. I think my listeners.
Mr. Speaker, I stand here today as a distraught father and grandfather. I stand here with parents in Abbotsford who are deeply concerned about sexually graphic and explicit content available in certain fictional books within our public school libraries to children as young as 11 years of age. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that the House brace themselves for the following words from one such book called Eleanor Park, and I quote, "I know you're a slut, you smell like cum, nothing but a bitch and heat."
Member,
end quote.
Member, please do not use that kind of language.
I apologize, Mr. Speaker, and I actually would retract those words. Mr. Speaker, this language is deeply disturbing.
I mean, it's crazy.
That is crazy. 11-year-olds?
11-year-old. And you should, like I say, you should see the illustrations in some of these books. It is absolutely crazy. What are we doing to our kids? It doesn't make any sense to me. Now, I get, kids need to be exposed to the real world. Kids need to be exposed to, sexual understanding. Kids need to be very accepting of all children, regardless of, who they are and the orientations. But wait a second here. This stuff, you wouldn't be allowed to say on television. You're certainly not allowed to have it, in other types of media.
Yeah.
Some of the material that is in there, you have to be adult
to go see or to read.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's now being available to kids. What have we done? And so I look at it and I look, okay, what are we doing to our society? We're saying it's okay to go out and do drugs. They're safe drugs, don't worry. And then you look at this material that's in our schools, right, taking away children and attacking children's innocence. What is it we're trying to do? And oh yeah, parents know you don't get to know about this. You don't get to know this is going on for your kids. I don't understand. I don't understand why governments are insisting this is the right way to go, but this craziness has to stop. And it's not that it's going against any one people. It's just, let's kids be kids. Let's actually have some decency in society. Why are we breaking down all of our, if you want to call it taboos or whatever it may be? Why are we doing this? Let's have a society, quite frankly, that can just get on with parents having full engagement with their kids, understanding what's going on in schools, being able to be part of every decision that's going on, a society that actually cares and tries to deal with people with addictions, not just giving them drugs. Let's create a good and decent society. That's what we're trying to do with the Conservative Party. It's just standing for what's right and being straight up with people, not doing poly-spin and trying to hide behind nice words like SOGI 1, 2, 3. Doesn't that sound so nice?
Yeah.
Well, wait a second here. What is that really about?
What does that mean? Exactly. No, it's alarming and concerning, and I would look to, I don't want the last word, but I will say this, is that I appreciate the fight that you're fighting. I think the public appreciates that, and thankfully it's being reflective in the polls, and just, you can smell it. You can smell the pendulum. You can smell what's going on right now, and I think a lot of people are concerned about it. And I would like to, before people write this particular episode off as hate speech or racist or any of these lingos that, people like a series of crazy stuff and accusations, the seat that John is sitting in right now is more than, I'm open to listening to people who want to make the argument for all of the stuff we just were talking about. And I'll hear you out, and I'll because I'm curious to know where is this coming from?
Yep.
And the communication isn't just one-sided. I want to give them the opportunity to be able to actually break it down in a way that's going to make sense, because I don't get it, and I'd like to stop it. And if we don't stop it, and you'd like to go for it and continue on, this platform, if you're listening to it, should hopefully be a way for you to express why is that even a healthy and good thing to have in place.
But, and maybe the thing to do, and I don't know if this is the right thing to do or not, we'll see how things play out here as we get into this election. But maybe the thing to do is actually give parents a choice.
Well, yeah.
And if this is what they want for their children, maybe we'll have a school that specializes in that. You can send your kids there.
Yeah.
And if you don't want that,
that's
maybe
not a bad idea.
School.
Yeah.
And they can specialize in other things, and you can send your kids there. Maybe that's the way to address this, as opposed to forcing this on everybody.
Without parental consent.
Yeah,
that's the man.
And so I look at it, and, we've got a lot of things to bring forward, and people don't, we did some polling before Christmas, and what it showed was that 56% of people in BC are considering voting Conservative. 31% is definitely or most likely, 25% is considering. And so when you look at it, you think, okay, how do we, it's, switching into election here, how do we get those people to come over and become voters? Well, part of it is they don't know who we are as a Conservative Party. And so they see, the attacks and sort of the one or two topic issues and this kind of stuff. And they go, oh, wait a second, what else is it they stand for? So we're going to be putting out, very broad, but very impactful positions on a wide range of things. Everything, like you say, from dealing with drugs and addiction, how we're going to address crime, affordability, housing crisis. A big one is a huge shift that we need to have in our healthcare system, which is in a complete disaster.
Yeah.
What we're doing in education, et cetera. We're going to roll these things out so that people have a chance to see just who we are and what we stand for, and then make a decision. Are they interested in what has happened over the last 32 years? It's been 16 years of NDP and 16 years of BC Liberal. Can anybody point to anything that's better? We're going to show them that, we can try to solve these. We can actually do things that can move us in a different direction, that can create more positive outcomes. Because as going back to Einstein again, after 32 years, doing more of the same isn't going to change things. You can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, let's wrap it up before I get into trouble. Okay.
No problem.
I'd hate to be the guy to always wrap it up, but hey.
Well, look, I've enjoyed this, and one thing, with a goodie bag like this,
it's going to keep you coming back.
It's going to keep coming back. Like, can we be on here next week?
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to address. We went through the list there, and I'd like to address them in point form in a way where we can try and hit on them because we're kind of hitting different areas.
I was wandering around too, and carrying on, and so I know I took up a bunch of time on topics.
It's all good.
Other things, but that's what you do as a politician. When you want to talk about something, you just talk about something else. I'm joking.
Smoke green, eh?
I'm joking. I am more than happy to address anything that comes up. And the reason for that, quite frankly, is I believe very much that politicians do need to be straight up. Enough of the poly spin. Just be straight up with people.
Proof is in the pudding.
Well, hopefully
people aren't when they see a response that's vague or misleading, people see it.
Well, they're used to it. And that's why many people say they're all the same. Politicians, they're just all the same. Well, they are the same because they think that's the only way they can get elected. And I'm going to take a different approach, and we'll see. Maybe I don't get elected. Maybe our party doesn't elect anybody, but I think people are looking for change, and we want to be able to present something that is that change that hopefully, should we be successful, and some of the policies we can bring in, particularly around transparency and the ability to no longer just raise taxes or increase new taxes unless it's done through referendum, things like that can actually change politics for the better in this province.
It's good to hear. I'm looking forward to it. I'm gonna hold you to it. I'm gonna just have this episode and repeat every time I don't. Yeah.
Please do. And I tell you what, I don't have a problem with being accountable. And I'll tell you, I'll give you something from my history, and we're probably over time here. Now you are going to get trouble.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Sorry. So I was a school trustee before I became a provincial politician, and it seems to be a lifetime or two ago now. But when we went through a process where we had to close schools, and it was never easy. I mean, you're ripping up a community around a school. It's never an easy thing to do. And so we had to make some decisions. And there's one school in particular that I was really passionate about. It was a traditional school. They had great outcomes, but they had so few kids in the school that we just couldn't leave it open. And so I voted to close that school. And afterwards, the next day, I went to the school to meet with some parents. Well, 150 parents showed up, and I was the only one there. And I stayed and answered everybody's questions and walked through the process. I don't have a problem being accountable for what I do and for what I stand for. I don't have a problem with being straight up. And so you hold me accountable, please do. Because
I will, and
I'm also not going to be promising things I can't deliver. I'm not going to be trying to promise everything to everybody because I want to get votes. No. I had a question the other day from somebody about an advanced education thing, and I said, it's a good issue. It's a very important issue, but I don't think we can get to it right away because there's only so much room we have to be able to do things. And so I've just got to be straight up with people. That's the only way you should be as a politician, as opposed to making false promises and virtue signaling and then just not delivering.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that. It's refreshing, really, honestly, to hear. And what's more refreshing is the actions. Talk is cheap, they say. I believe that. And I've seen enough of the actions so far that, you stood your ground, and we talked about it in episode 80, if anyone wants to dig into that a little bit. And I think that's what people rally behind. The ones who stick themselves out and the ones that are leading in the polls that seem to be so polarizing. Why is it they're so popular? They're sticking their necks out, and they're trying to make proper change through action instead of lip service.
I'm not afraid of the cancel culture. And to stand up for what I believe is right and ask people to support me. That's what the Conservative Party of British Columbia is going to do.
Awesome. That's good to hear. It's good to hear. Tell Daniel I said hi.
Next time I see her, I will, yes.
All right.
Wonderful lady.
Yeah, she is. Powerhouse.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, John. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me on. I look forward to our next chance.
So am I. Okay, take care.
You too. Take care.